Southern Shores Council meeting for May the 16th, 2016 is now in session. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please join in a moment of silence. Thank you. Council, I'd ask for a motion to approve the agenda. I have a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion's made and carried. I didn't hear a vote from Mr. McDonald. Okay, thank you, Gary. Council, I'd like a motion to approve the consent agenda, tab 1.
Second.
Thank you. The only thing I noticed, Sheila, is one typo in the, before I ask for a vote on that. On line 28. He versus her. Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything they'd like to mention about the minutes?
Nope.
All in favor of approving the minutes from April the 4th?
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda is made, motion has been made and approved. General public comment. Thank you, Bonnie. Carlos Gomez. Good morning, Carlos.
Good morning, Fred, Leon, Tom, Chris, Gary. I'm here again talking about Juniper Trail and there and Gum, Sweet Gum. Just try to voice myself out here, and I know I might be late because we're looking at bids coming out on Thursday, I believe. As an engineer, we got the plans from RPC, and looking at the plans, I was a little bit shocked about what I saw from the construction drawings versus what I've seen before, which really wasn't different, but I'm busy and I didn't get to see all the details until I saw them in an engineering sense. So I'm gonna start from I live at 46 Juniper Trail for the record. I used to work for Kitty Hawk Landing, developers of Southern Shores. I worked for Mickey Hayes, Walter Davis, and David Stick. And I have talked to Mickey, and he asked me to please pass a message to you. The Southern Shores was designed for a very low-density subdivision, town setting, rural setting on a maritime forest, which is very unique, extremely unique. Different than Martins Point that was clear-cut in the late 1800s, early 1900s for shipbuilding, and really became a pine forest growth where you can see nice, big, broad streets with gutters, swales and all that. So it was designed to be under a canopy. When you used to drive on Juniper Trail, and it's changed, but still like that, you used to drive like in a tunnel of trees, with the trees real close to each side. Designed that way. We walked the streets, we looked at trees, we knew they were too close. As a young engineer then, I would tell Mickey, that's crazy, these streets are not gonna last and all that. And he said, no, but that's what we have in mind. That's what people are gonna want to come and live here. Guess what? I've been living in my corner for 25 years. It was designed to have winding streets, slow. Now streets are getting wider, they're inviting more people to come. A lot of the damages we got is because if you ever go on a Saturday and Sunday in Southern Shores and Juniper Trail and Dogwood Trail, Sea Oaks and all that, you cannot even ride your bicycle because the cars are just amazing. They bring in a lot of traffic that were not designed for. Now we can try to put a thoroughfare, streets that will meet us, the traffic demand, the heavy demand, the Little Juniper Trail bridge into Chickahawk and Trinity. Those were 2 cul-de-sacs, but they were tied together for safety, and then put a little bridge on top of there. It was never designed for the kind of traffic it's got. Thank God my children are grown up now, because they couldn't go and play on the street. So I look at these plans coming as you go into Chickahawk to your left. We got a standard curb and gutter, 24-inch with a curve, a lot of concrete flumes to a retention pond that makes absolutely no sense how large it is. And I'll
Thank you,
talk to
Carlos.
Tom later.
Thank you. Debbie Newberry. Morning, Debbie.
Okay, today I just wanted to follow up on a few things from last week or a couple weeks ago. And the first thing I want to say is I'm sorry that I spoke out of turn. I should not have done that. And I know that better, but I do apologize for that. But I wanted to say a few things. After the meeting, both you, Tom, and Chris indicated to me that what I'm doing is blowing things out of proportion, and I'm saying things that aren't necessarily true. And I wanted to point out that I may be blowing some things up, but I don't think out of proportion at all. And the whole goal here is that every citizen understands where we're going in this town, and if the citizens all want to go in that direction, then so be it. I don't believe they do, because most of the people that I've talked to have come here and continue to say they came here because of the narrow streets, the winding streets, and just how quaint it was, and they don't really want to change that. But however, as I said, it is all true, even things that I've said about narrow streets, and I can give you all that information again from reliable sources. Also, it was indicated to me as I was talking to Chris as he walked away and told me he was going to talk to a real engineer. And I just want to point out that I realize that was kind of a jab at me, but I did want to say that I am a real engineer. My undergraduate's in civil engineering, my master's is in environmental engineering, and sorry to say that I've worked in this field over 30 years. I wish I was not quite as old, but I am. And so I have been in the field for quite a while, and you talk to a real engineer, and I'm glad that you feel that Carlos is a real engineer. And, but I want to point out, he has just said some of the things, I just heard him say some of the things that I've been saying. Maybe a little bit differently, maybe not as much emotion as I have shown, but he is saying the same thing. So please listen to the real engineers, and let's take this into consideration as we move forward and really determine what we want for this town. And, I'd like everybody to be able to eventually, not necessarily today, but voice what your vision is for our streets and our town, because I think we all need to know that, and I'd like to all understand so we can all be on the same page. And maybe we aren't that different, but I think we need to get together and we need to understand that and make some real hard choices for our town. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Debbie. This time I'll close public comment. At this point, as for a review of the fiscal year 17-18 proposed operating budget is requested by Councilmember McDonald. That covers under tab 2 of your book, from your book, Council. Mr. McDonald, would you like to tell us what you would like to start with in your review?
Sure. First, to Peter, is there any changes in this than what we had from the April meeting?
There's no changes in my proposed budget from what you discussed on directed at your April meeting.
For example, I guess my next question is back under the very last page, capital reserve, interior canal maintenance, outside channel. Was that 10 and 10 in there, or is that the
projection for the boat.
I'm sorry, which page are you referring to?
36 in the book,
Go to the capital reserve fund.
from Capital Reserve Fund.
No.
And the question is, the question centers on the boat.
Well,
No,
is that the money for the boats, what I'm asking?
10,000.
It's explained in there that the,
It's interior
in the,
maintenance.
in the budget itself,
Because I didn't
the
see,
line
the-
item,
I didn't see canal maintenance when we discussed it the last
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it was there. I remember it.
it's laid out in,
I mean, I remember it.
on page 26, Public Works Department. The boat purchase shows that those funds come from the Capital Reserve Fund canals as council directed.
Right, and my question is that interior and outside channel maintenance, is that in addition to?
No, sir, the council had said you wanted to clearly show that you were still putting money in, so
So that's
Continue
going-
to show that.
That's going to the Capital Reserve Fund.
that's correct,
Okay. But then it's coming back out to be used for the boat.
coming back out.
That was what I needed to know.
thanks, sir.
Second, I talked to the chief, and the lights look good, by the way. If you've ridden down the road at night, you see those lights at the crosswalks. And I asked him, and he said there may be one additional area, but there are several crosswalks that are not lighted, and we've established that. So I would like to make a motion that we add $10,000 to our budget for crosswalk lights to continue that process until we get all those crosswalks lit, as determined by Peter and the chief as in priority. I think that's important because I think at the last meeting, I wasn't here, but I watched the video. There was a gentleman talking about one that was dangerous and was asking for that. And as I go down the road, I see several that are not lit.
Well, they haven't finished yet.
Right, so, and we didn't budget anything for that, so I think we need to budget for those lights.
There are 11 crosswalks that were budgeted for,
Right, that was last year. I'm talking about the coming year.
right, but there are 11 that we have a permit to install that we have funds for that have not been completed yet.
Okay.
So 11 will be lighted.
And we
There's
have-
one at 180 that a citizen made inquiry about and came in and talked to me, and I wrote the district engineer to ask him whether that would qualify or not. I have not heard back from him, and that would be, if the council wanted to put one at that particular spot, that would be $3,000 basically to put a pair there. The other crosswalks, we would not be able to get a permit for, according to the district engineer, because they're already under a traffic signal lighted area. That's what he's telling me.
What about the ones that are not at lights down through here? There's two between here and Chickahawk Trail.
If they have a diamond crosswalk sign on it, they're scheduled to get the lights
Okay. And
with
they're already
painted,
in-
with paint on the
So my question
highway.
is, they're already in the budget?
Yes, they're in this year's budget being paid for. We've already got that under an obligated contract for, and those would be part of the 11.
Okay. So that's out of the money we had last year?
Out of this current budget year.
Okay. So all of those will be taken care of?
All the ones that have a sign up with a crosswalk on the pavement have received a permit to be able to put the lights up. As I said, there's that one that possibly is not a marked crosswalk that may be eligible to become a marked crosswalk. If it does, we would seek to put the lights there as well.
So
But-
do we need to add anything there for the one that you were talking about that may come a?
If that comes up, I think we can find the money to cover that one spot somewhere else in the budget. But that would be roughly $1,500 a pole and light for that one. And again, to my knowledge, the district engineers said they would not be able to permit any other crosswalks for lighting.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, sir. At your last meeting, you approved $150,000 for Pelican Watch out of the unrestricted fund for this year, if that bill comes active, to pay for that. I would recommend or make a motion that we put, I don't know if it's going to come or not, but that we put $150,000 into next year's budget to cover that and fund it and plan for it instead of taking it out of the unrestricted fund. And even if we use this out of the unrestricted fund, that budget item would go back into the fund to offset that. Looking at what the governor said when he requested $900 million from the federal government to cover costs for the state of North Carolina and got $6 million, I'm not sure how much we're going to be reimbursed for storms going forward, and I think we need to protect our unrestricted fund as well as we can and ongoing and plan for those things, because in this time, it looks like we're not going to get reimbursement that we could count on in the past that we're not going to see in the future. So my recommendation would be that we put that in our budget, find it, and place it back in the unrestricted fund even if it comes out this year.
I'm confused about that, Gary. I'm not sure what you're asking. You're mixing kind of apples and oranges here with the beach nourishment project and something to do with storm mitigation.
Well, no. You're using beach nourishment, 150 out of the unrestricted fund. Well,
When you say unrestricted, you mean undesignated fund balance?
undesignated fund balance. Okay, you took it out at the last meeting, or you approved using that to pay for the, to offset what those folks would pay. And it may not come out this year, and then it will go back into the fund, and then we'd have to appropriate again. Why don't we budget that item and going forward plan for those types of things since we know it? And it's not apples and oranges, it's planning our money and not just going to the fund balance and pulling every time we need to go to the fund balance and pull something. And I know I have a lot of disagreement with that, but I'm still thinking that we need to plan those things out and plan for them. And now we know about that Pelican Watch and what it's going to cost us, and we should start planning for it, just like canal maintenance. Well, we had to, years ago, they had to come up with a way to do that, and they pulled it out of the fund balance. Now, we're planning to put $20,000 per year in there for canal maintenance.
Right.
We need to be planning for beach nourishment.
Right.
And instead of just jerking out and taking our fund balance to a low end, we need to maintain it.
I'm going to ask the budget officer to address that, because I think I know what I'd say, but we've already discussed this in our last meeting, and we decided we would go ahead and allocate those funds from this year. If the project is delayed until next year, we'll move the funds and put those funds back and take them out from next year's budget. That's how I interpret it. Peter, would you clarify that
The
for me?
$150,000 the council approved as a budget amendment, as part of a budget amendment, that amount that's represented by the 150 for this current year is there to help cash flow if the bills start coming due before July 1, which is a possibility. If they don't and they're not paid out, that money would automatically revert back into unassigned fund balance. Then the council would need to approve another budget amendment to pull that money back out of unassigned fund balance to pay the 150 in the next fiscal year.
An amendment to 17-18 budget.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that's
So
what,
it
that's
would
what I
be,
understood
it would roll
before.
in and out. I will say that your capital, on another caveat note, the capital reserve fund is one of the items that the capital reserve fund is designated for is beach nourishment. So that can be used for beach nourishment, and that was always our planning tool over the years to put money into that for whatever infrastructure purposes the council wanted each year, and that's part of the budget.
Does that make sense, Gary?
I know all that. I understand that.
Okay.
But we're still not planning for, we're just pulling it out of our savings account.
if we weren't planning for it, we wouldn't be doing it. If we weren't planning for it, we
You're
wouldn't have taken the
reacting.
measure.
Okay, we're reacting to it, we're not planning for it.
That's just a semantics thing, but I understand what you're saying.
No, it's
Would
it's
you,
planning.
would you restate your motion so we can consider it?
That we budget that $150,000 in next year's budget.
If we need it.
No, well, no, if, we're gonna need it. Even if it's paid out this year, that 150 would go back into the into the unrestricted fund balance to reimburse what we pulled out.
No, isn't it that the people pay the money?
Yes.
Yeah, see, we're not,
That's going into the budget.
yeah, but that's the 150 is what the folks are gonna chip in towards it. So yes, we're borrowing from ourselves, but there is a fairly solid sense that you're gonna get that money back. I'm not saying no to your motion, I'm just clarifying that we're acting as the bank in this case.
We shouldn't be a
Yes,
bank, we're
Peter.
That's-
operating as a government.
Yeah, I feel,
I
good
understand.
point. The 150 as it comes in from the special assessments, that actually automatically pays the fund balance back.
Right.
Because it's not budgeted as a revenue right now, so those will automatically pay that money back into the fund balance.
So if everybody pays, it would be neutral. Now,
Yes.
now it's a 5-year period, and they may pay a little earlier, and they may pay just on time, we don't really know, and some folks have said they want to pay early, that's fine. That would mean that we get more back sooner. So that, I mean, but I think to your point about having maybe a line item in there for beach nourishment isn't a bad idea. And I'm also thinking about the profiles are going to need to be updated.
Yes, they are,
And
and we discussed that.
we did discuss that, and that's a, what, figure a $30,000 hit?
Well, and I think Peter
You know-
addressed that when we met, that it's in there and they're not gonna do it until later in this project. And we'll have that for this coming year, right?
Well, yes,
And
yes.
as we move forward, we'll budget it.
But that could be, in my mind, that could be part of that chunk of money that you're saying, because there's no guarantee that Dare County would necessarily chip in. They might, like they did in the past, but they might not. So, I mean, I guess we're talking about next year's budget at this point. I mean, I don't
Right.
mind putting some money in there for, specific for beach nourishment, but
Well,
I'm
I'm
getting a little
just-
ahead of ourselves, that's all I'm thinking. Is this better placed next year at this time when we're discussing next year's budget? We'll know a little bit more about what revenues we have and everything else.
Well, we know that we're gonna spend $500,000 on this Pelican Watch project.
Of which
Well,
150 is being reimbursed.
Where 150 will come back to
I
us.
understand that,
Well,
but we're taking
cash
a
flow-
$500,000 out of our fund
Yeah,
balance.
cash flow wise, that's correct.
Sir?
But cash flow wise, that is correct. We're going to be taking $500,000 out. But 150 is coming back, so our net, when it's done, net flow is 350.
But we're not gonna see that 150 until 5 years out totally.
That's right.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
what you're doing is, yeah, I understand, we're loaning the money out to do the project.
I understand
I'm
that.
saying budget for it.
Exactly. I support what Gary's saying. I can't see taking money out of the undesignated fund until we actually need it. But in the meantime, we should be budgeting for, in this case, the $150K for paying the bill for beach nourishment at Pelican Watch. But just arbitrarily taking that money out, I don't think is a good idea unless you just absolutely need it, because those reserves really need to be built up more. Based on what we're hearing out of Washington as far as next year's budget, I have a feeling that we're going to be budgeting, hopefully, for our own disaster relief fund, because the money's not going to be there from the federal government, primarily FEMA and other agencies as well. I think a good indication of that's what happened with Governor Cooper's request for relief for Matthew, and he's not getting it. And if he's not getting it, we're certainly not going to get it. We're not going to get anything from the state nor the federal government. So my attitude is, and I agree with Gary, I would put that money back in the undesignated fund and budget for it for next year. if the bill comes due and we've got to have it, then we can deal with it at that time. But I'd keep that savings account and reserve account as healthy as I could, because there's a lot of unforeseen things that could come in the coming months. Being we're entering hurricane season, it's likely we're going to need funding that we don't plan for.
Mr. Mayor, just to remind council as a follow-up to Mr. Nason's comment on page 35, that capital reserve fund shows you a projected amount at the bottom. If this budget were passed as proposed, that balance would then be $200,000, 180 in that capital reserve fund. And again, that's for infrastructure improvements, including beach nourishment. That's on page 35.
So you got $200,000 basically in there now.
That would be the balance if the budget were passed as proposed.
I don't see any reason to change that, to add to that at this point for the capital reserve. We had the 200,000, you need 150. If, at worst case, we 150, we're trying to cover.
Well, yeah, but you're talking capital, I'm talking the unrestricted
I
fund.
understand that, but the undesignated fund balance is where we're taking out, would take out to cover these, what Fred alluded to, what Fred mentioned a minute ago, a storm event or some like a hurricane. And we've been able to do that successfully over the years without having to, even though we did get reimbursed in the past, we might not get reimbursed for all of it this time around. I understand.
And that's a good point, Tom, and I understand that. But going forward, we're in a different political world,
Right, understand that.
and you got to adjust when you fall into a new category, and if you're not going to get reimbursement from state and federal, I think I read in the Post that Governor Cooper requested $900 million, and the department he requested that from's total budget is $600 million.
Did he really expect to get it?
He got $6 million.
But did he really expect to get 900 million?
Well, he didn't know the budget at his request time, but that's the damage that Matthew did to the state of North Carolina.
I understand
And
that.
actually, it's not the total damage, it's additional damage he's trying to recoup. But when you look going forward, we're not going to be, FEMA and all those departments are having their budgets cut. And we've got an outstanding request for, what, $500,000, 400 and some $1,000?
That's from the Stafford Act funds, which are different from the.
Which
what
are
Cooper-
appropriated, if I'm correct.
They're appropriated, but the other, what that was turned down was a different pot of money, 900 million.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, new day, and we need to start planning for that new day. I'm not disagreeing with you, I understand, it's worked in the past. But,
Well, can we do this? Let's get through this year's budget process, and then I think it's a valid point to bring it up in next year's budget process, and we'll know more about what sort of reimbursements we're getting over the course of the year. We don't need to make this decision, today for next year's budget. That's a good point, though. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't.
Maybe 18, 19 will be affected.
We're talking, now we're a year out in the budget, and that's okay. And it's a good point, and what we talked about with the surveys, possibly the redoing of any beach nourishment, it's all valid, but I guess I'd say one thing at a time here.
And we can direct our town manager to include those things in the budget for next year.
Yeah.
That's not an issue.
well, I feel like they should be included in there this year. And I made a motion that we do that for that $150,000.
Wait, but didn't your motion refer to next year's budget?
For this year's budget, that we budget. We're in this fiscal year.
Okay.
My motion is that we
Misunderstood.
put it into our budget going forward, which is 2017 and 18 budget.
I see. You weren't talking about but next year?
No.
Okay.
Got a motion on the floor to add?
To budget the 150
Restate your motion to.
Motion to add the $150,000 for the Pelican Watch budget, Pelican Watch project into our next year's budget as a line item, to be, use it for that, if it comes up and we don't use it out of that fund balance, and if we use it out of the fund balance before this year, that money would revert back to the fund balance, so that we are budgeting for it instead of taking it out of our savings account.
I see what you're saying.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Any further discussion, council?
From my standpoint, I want to know where that money's coming from out of this year's budget. So before I,
No, I agree with you.
I'm not, if we can find the money, I'm not against it.
Well,
But I want to look at reasonably finding the money, and that, I guess to that point, can we ask Peter to come up with suggestions as to how to find that money? And then we can look at it for,
Something's gonna have to be reduced.
but
If I could make a recommendation too, that you're in a weird procedural posture with your budget, in that the way this works is the manager presents a budget, and he's already done that. And then that budget is set for a public hearing, and then you adopt a budget ordinance where that's the governing body making decisions. The law is not absolutely clear on how it works if you are directing the manager to make changes after his budget presentation and after the hearing's been set. So we haven't had the hearing yet,
that's right.
but the hearing's been set for the June meeting. So the budget you have is Peter's budget. It's the manager's budget, and that's what the statute says the manager can do. Now, that doesn't mean you can't prepare to make changes, but I think it's complicated for you to actually direct changes when it's already been presented. Now, when you're dealing with the ordinance portion of it, when you're actually voting, you can certainly make any changes to it you want. So what I'm thinking now is that you may want to modify your motion to not make changes, but to have Peter provide you with recommendations at the hearing date for how such changes would go, so that you could decide then to make changes officially when you do finally adopt an ordinance.
What you're saying is provide us with the impact of those changes.
Yeah, or just show him.
Options.
Yeah.
How are we gonna handle this 150?
So he can tell you where the money would come from or not come from.
Right.
Without changing the budget that's on file, that's sitting over there, that people have been able to have access to prepare for the hearing. But by talking about it here in an open meeting, people know that you're interested in that, and by giving this direction, Peter can come to the next, to the hearing and discuss that if y'all want to get into it at that time. But where the complexity lies is if you direct him to make a change to a budget that's already been, to a manager's budget that's already been presented, it's not real clear how the law treats that. It doesn't really say he can re-present his budget. So I think it would be better to, if you have actual changes to be made to the budget, to do that at the budget ordinance time rather than in this intermediary period.
So Ben, what are you're saying that the budget that's on file now needs to go unchanged because the public needs to review it and make comments at the public hearing, and then after then we can suggest changes?
Yes. Well, not just suggest changes, you can make changes. What the process is, I think, prior to April 30th or something, the department heads and everybody come to Peter with their calculations. Then Peter puts together an ordinance, and he had multiple sessions with y'all to discuss that, and there were changes made to his ordinance with direction. But then he presented his ordinance and said, this is it, and then there was the setting of a hearing, and then Sheila put the notice out for that. So that probably should stay on file as the ordinance that's going to be for the hearing. But once that hearing occurs,
It's open up again.
it's opened up again. After that hearing, you can have as many meetings as you want. Just before July 1, you have to adopt a budget ordinance. And you can make changes to the revenues and stuff at
That makes sense
that time.
because if the public has changes that.
Yeah, well, and what was complicated,
Table your motion until after the public hearing.
Well, let's direct him to bring options of where to get the $150,000, because that would affect, I mean, that's gonna affect other departments and other areas within the budget.
And he knows what your motion is. So are you willing to table that motion for now and not consider it today unless
Well, my motion, I'll change it to direct him to give us some options
Do we need a
on
motion for that?
how to pull that $150,000 out.
Do we need a motion for that?
Do I need a motion?
I said, do we?
I don't know that you need one, but if someone makes one, then someone makes one.
Made.
So the motion, as I understand it, is we're going to direct the town manager to see if he can come up with some way to find that $150,000 in our existing budget.
150,
50,000,
150.
yeah, $150,000. And advise us of that at the budget ordinance time, public hearing time,
Yeah, I'd agree to that.
or in the interim.
Then you need a second.
I need a second to that.
Who's making the motion? Gary or you?
Gary made the motion.
Gary made it.
Gary
Give me
made
a
it.
second.
All right. Any further discussion, council? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Gary?
I had one more, but I may need to wait until we have the public hearing and make a motion that we make a change.
And I'm not saying that there's any reason not to discuss it, to have some concept so that everybody has an idea of,
If you have something you want to discuss
What
in
the
general terms,
positions
certainly
are.
can do that.
and that the
Well,
public
I
can
was-
have an idea.
And, do y'all have a copy of the personnel salary
You
information?
have them all, I think.
I only have one. I brought my own.
You got one.
You ready?
Got my copy.
Hopefully you've looked at this. My first question is, and I'm gonna make some friends and I'm gonna make some enemies on what my motions are gonna be for this. But I look at it and I think over years of working with budgets and trying to be fair to employees and people, first, I need a definition of what a merit bonus is. A merit bonus to me says that someone has earned based on performance, and I need a definition of how that was decided. It looks like that that's an across the board, and if it's not, just tell me that it's based on something else, or
It will be based on merit. It is a bonus based on merit at one time, and it won't be applied equally across the board, but it was put in there for budget reasons, like you see, but it will be based on merit at one time, and that's why it's called a merit bonus. It does not go into the base salary.
does that mean that everybody's gonna get that?
No. Does not necessarily mean that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way it's presented, it looks like it's across the board, but what you're saying,
Had to be put in there somewhere.
you add all that money up into a pool and then you
Yeah.
decide who.
Yes.
gets,
The council directed a similar appropriation approximately 3 years ago. This is a merit bonus, it's a one-time, it does not go to the base of the salary.
That makes sense.
Yeah. That's what we used to do.
Well, and that changes a little bit of what I was looking at, because if it's just a bonus, which I was thinking, I was looking at this and thinking, okay, everybody's gonna get this, everybody's gonna get that. That's a total, gentlemen, of about $33,000, a little over that. And from my count, when I count up the total number of employees we have about 23 staff. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The guys at the bottom always tend to get, you know, I've worked salary scales and worked bonuses and worked these for years. Folks at the bottom seem to get the least because you're getting a percentage increase. What I was looking at would be that we give them a across-the-board raise instead of a percent, and across-the-board bonus instead of percent. That way, everybody gets an equivalent raise no matter what. If you divide that $33,000 by 23 staff, it comes to about $1,452. Low-end person on our salary scale is going to get maybe $850, $900 as a raise and a bonus. After taxes, they're going to get $600. Top end, they're going to get between $2,500 and $3,000. So I was looking at, instead of doing a 1% increase or a 1.5% pay raise, give a set amount across the board. That way the folks who on the bottom end that struggle would get an equal raise, and their salary would be adjusted. Not that much more, and it wouldn't cost us anything.
You said $33,000?
If I'm correct and my math's right, there's $19,000 for the 2.5% COLA adjustment, and there's $13,482 for the 1% bonus increase.
So you were adding COLA and merit, that's what threw me off. I only saw 13,000.
Yeah, I just combined those and divided it by the 23.
On page 2 of that, I noticed a heading over on just the title above code enforcement. We got 2.5%. Shouldn't it be 1.5?
Yeah, that's a typo.
That's a typo.
That's a typo.
Yeah. I just wanted to get
Yes,
that
that
clarified.
should have been corrected to 1.5.
That's a huge change. Thank you, Leo.
It doesn't affect the dollar amounts.
So anyway, that would be a suggestion to look at as we move forward. That way, we're giving everybody a raise, and it's more equitable across the board than it is the other way.
It may be more equitable, but it might not be more fair. I think for the most part, those people who draw the higher salaries are people with more responsibility. At least in my company, that was the way it worked. I think most companies and most agencies work that way. It's nice to be able to give your people at the lower level of skill and lower level of involvement in the operation of your company some consideration, but I think if you try to make it a totally level playing field, you're punishing the people at the top who actually produce the most for your company or the most for your town. That's why I have a problem with it. I think the way it was done was probably fair and equitable in itself. That's just my thought about that. Thank you. In other words, I think the way it's structured is probably fair to all of the employees, not accommodating anyone more than any other. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the county council? Anything else you'd like to share? Chris?
I worked under the
No,
merit
I don't think
program.
about it.
Yeah,
And I understand,
I'd be
you
glad to
know,
think about it.
and I understand that, you know, I've worked state government for 40 years, and there were times when us at the top didn't get anything, and those at the bottom got pay raises. And really didn't upset me that I didn't think it was fair either, but folks at the top have a tendency to be able to survive a little better than those that are on an hourly wage.
Yeah, if you look at it from a percentage basis, the higher level people are going to continue to get a lot more money, and their base salaries are going to go up significantly from year to year. But the people at the bottom, it's going to be pretty slow. And so I think what Gary's saying is to provide that incentive for the people at the lower levels to help them kind of normalize some of the pay.
We'll run it both ways and have it for the council at the next meeting, if you like.
That's reasonable.
And I think it's about 80% of the people would get a bit more, get a higher
A
raise.
little bit more compensation.
That's the old 80/20
And
rule.
that's fine.
I mean, it's a large, there's only a small percentage that are going to, by this proposal, not benefit as well.
Right.
It's,
Are you okay with us taking, have him doing just what he said? Bring it back to us.
and we'll, I'll make a motion to make those adjustments after we have the public hearing.
Yes. Anything else, Gary, on your list?
Not on the budget, no, sir. Yes, there is, one other thing, the fund balance. I would like for us to add a fund balance sheet with the list and always have it when we have budget. We've got the capital reserve, but I don't see the fund balance in there.
Talking about undesignated fund
Yeah.
balance or the unappropriated fund.
And monies that have been appropriated out so we can keep a running tally. We talked about that at the last time, and I looked for that in the book, and I looked online, and you got to go online and look for it. I got it in my email, but it'd be good to have with the book each time.
Bonnie, would you help me with this? I think the undesignated or unappropriated fund balance is a moving target, but
Well, you don't know, I know it's a moving target, we discussed it.
Yeah,
We just need the sheet.
Yeah, he
with-
wants to know basically each month what was taken in or out.
Yeah, what we can do is like we've given you, is the balance, the audited balance, and then show the council budget amendments that have come out for the last 12 months, exactly what's been given.
And
to
you're
you.
right, Leo, we discussed that at the last term, and it's not here, and I just request that it be there every time.
That's fine. Nothing wrong with that.
And
We
with-
discussed it in long depth, and I don't want to do that again. I know what's going to be said.
Of course, it'll show the with the council withdrawals, and it will caveat from the finance officer and from the budget officer that that's not, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the balance. So,
But it gives us a good idea.
thank you, Peter. Council, excuse me. Any new business, council? If not, I'll close the new business section, ask for general public comment for the second time. Anyone else signed up to speak? Welcome back, Carlos. You want another shot, huh?
So much to talk about, and I hear all the important matters that you're talking about it. And I say, well, there's a possibility you can save some money. Maybe scrap this project and wait till it's quality design, engineer, landscape properly. As I say, I received these plans from the contractors, and I discovered a 25-inch curve and gutter, drop inlets, pipes crossing under the road into this humongous retention pond that's going to be full with leaves and clogging, like in front of Chris's house, those pipes are already clogged with leaves. Quality design needs to be proper and should be economical in construction. It's just that talking to the neighbors, they're concerned about this. We talk about concerns about the Miller's Driveway and 48 Juniper Trail draining into the road, creating this flooding. I talked to the engineers, they could talk to them, and maybe they could provide an easement to have some stormwater allocated there so the water wouldn't run off. I talked to them, nobody's approaching. Actually, I think the town should get a construction easement because some of the sidewalk goes over the property, not very much, not like it does in mine, as I discovered, that was built in my property. The stormwater pond right at the foot of the bridge was created when they paved the swales, but it takes about 4 hours to drain in and percolate. We created a tremendous expense to pass the water from one side to the other when we could have graded to go the water on the other side. Minimum expenses, no cookie cutter engineering, but, working out that way. I suggest that, as a warning, to postpone the irreversible changes into our town, into a maritime forest that is pristine, very unique in North Carolina. And let's allocate those resources into beautifying the town, the open spaces, the parks that you cannot even use. And right there on Juniper Trail, there's 2 parks you cannot even really walk into them. Let's use the money to improve the escape of the town and work with what we got. We got a beautiful town. It just takes a little effort to look at deeper, work with the people, just make it the best we can. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Council, any other business you want us to discuss? Anything you want to add, Peter? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss what we're doing as far as paving and the trees again, if that would be okay.
Yeah, I've got some comments too, Tom.
We get that magazine through the towns, and I read an article, I guess in April, maybe, it's been a couple of months, so it may have been February when I read an article about Sunset Beach and how they're redoing their streets in their community down there. And I understand Sunset does not have the trees that we have, but they've gone away from the use of curbs because it was flooding their streets. They've graded their streets so that the water runs off, and they're creating rain gardens and swales and some small things so that the water is channeled away from the road and those kinds of things, which is very low impact. And I thought it was pretty interesting to look at. And when I look at the projects that we've worked on in the last year, and I've only been on this council now about a year and going on, a year and a half now, Chris, that we've been here. Our standards are that we use low impact standards for the town of Southern Shores. It's what it reads every time I read it, I think. But then when I talked to, and I went out there, you were out there with me, with the town engineer. What you and I see as low impact standards differ. What the town engineer and I see as low impact standards differ. And I understand that. People are entitled to their opinions. However, I think we need to set what we think we need to do. If we're putting curbs and gutters in and then having to go back and spend $300,000 to buy a piece of property to reroute water where we made a mistake, I include myself in there, but I wasn't there when they did that and put that sidewalk and those curbs in that created that. That situation was there, but it enhanced it.
You're talking about Highway 12?
12 in East Dogwood. That occurred, all that water runs down the hill. We put in curbs and gutters, we put in a sidewalk, raised it up. We enhanced this flooding that was already there. Now we're having to fix it. And it continues. So I think we need to look really seriously when we do these things and be as natural as we can. Same thing, what Carlos is talking about, I know him for over 20 years. I've lived down there too. When they put that sidewalk in, we knew we were going to have a pond over there. I mean, I'm not an engineer, Carlos is. I knew there was going to be a pond over there because it ran down a hill to the right, to the sidewalk, and they had a little place like this where the water could go off the road into the sidewalk, and there's nowhere there for the water to go. So,
Now, who did that work? When the street was built originally, or when the street was rebuilt, or whatever they did to it, repaved?
Actually, if you look back to when the street was rebuilt, that section was not rebuilt. Then the sidewalk went in next year. Who did it? Same engineering company. The engineer that we have now was working with
Rival.
Weibel, and they did it. Put it in. They cut, I can't remember how many trees down through there at that time. But poor design. We look into Currituck, we look down in southern Dare County, we've got raised sidewalks, we've got permeable asphalt, we've got different options that we can use, and all we're doing is we're going to concrete on this one, because we do know concrete lasts better.
Right.
But is it the best option in a low place like that? So, I mean, just saying that we really need to look at what we're doing, so that 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road, a council's not sitting up here trying to fix something that we messed up.
Right. So what you're saying, I think, is we look at our policies and procedures as far as road rebuilds.
I think
Take another look at them.
we need to look at them.
I
Yeah, we
have-
looked at them at the beginning of our term on here, and we were,
And believe me, we've looked at them for 2 years before that pretty heavily, with a lot of good counsel from people in the community about what they felt we should do, to engineering-wise and otherwise. But we can go back and address them again. There's no question about that, if that's what you'd like to see.
well, I'd like to see that we do it right. And when you look at the mistakes that are happening, we're paying a lot for mistakes.
Well, you're,
I mean, Trinity Bridge, what was it, Deer Path?
But not all of those are the town all the time. Trinity Bridge, the town, that wasn't the town.
no, it wasn't.
No, that was the state.
So, I mean,
The
I'm
state
not
did
saying
that
you're
project.
wrong, I'm just saying that there are other, like, for
Okay.
example, NC-12 is
Gravy
is not
Pond.
the town.
NCTO is not the town, no, I
Wait a
understand
minute.
that. I think everybody
Gravy
understands
Pond,
that.
Deer Path, those have been paved recently. Mistakes were made, then they have to be corrected. So I'm just saying, we need to do
But now
it.
let's go back a little bit. You're saying mistakes. I think there were some structural issues with Gravy Pond. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's breaking up around the back now.
Yes, and that's because there were some structural
Well,
concerns
it
there,
was
which they
supposed to
contracted.
be rebuilt and that taken care of.
Right.
Just like, when we look at Trinity, Juniper, we're talking about now. That road going out was from, what the engineer told me the last time I met with him, it was from a point they rebuilt that street out.
That's correct.
Okay? That's the worst section. The part that wasn't rebuilt is better than the part that was.
You're talking about Juniper Trail at the south
Right.
end, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Deer Path and Gravy just for a minute, because they stick in my mind pretty clearly. The biggest problem there was a material that was used, which nobody had any control over, and the contractor went back and redid both those streets to compensate for that. And it hasn't held up well in Gravy Pond the second time around. It's a low place in there, and it hasn't done well. But that's not I don't think you can point fingers at our
I'm not-
procedures or our policies when something like that.
It's hard when a contractor doesn't execute. You can have consequences.
Or
which
his
may not be-
supplier doesn't execute.
His supplier, yes. Right. I know that one fairly well.
But the bottom line, the public thinks it's us.
Yeah, this public
And that's-
perception is that, no question
We
about
need to
it.
hold them
And
accountable.
I'm not going to get in playing defense all the time. I'm just going to tell the truth about it. And the fact of the matter, we had no control over the material that was used on that project, on both those
But I
projects.
think you bring up a good point. And I think, Tom, you're agreeing. I think it doesn't hurt to continue this discussion. I'll say what I said before. Let's have the town engineer come in and talk to us. Right? And tell us what his vision of low impact is. Because
Let's
you
do
brought up
that.
the point. You brought up the point of what maybe your vision and Tom's vision might be, but it is interesting to hear his vision. Also, I do think it's worth having him hear some of these concerns in a constructive and respectful manner. So I don't think that hurts anything whatsoever. It may or may not affect this particular one, but it might affect things going forward. It might increase sensitivity about the streets and about this. And if curbs and gutters are needed, which in some cases they might be, in some cases they might not be, he might err more on the side of not using curbs and gutters as a solution. I'm not going to get into the point of being an engineer or the engineer. I'm sure there's multiple solutions, but let's have him tell us what he's found out and his approach to this. I don't think that hurts, and I don't think he'd mind to come in and talk about it.
I have no further comments, but I'll ask Mr. Newberry from his end if he does.
Yeah, I do have some comments. First of all, I support both of the speakers that speak. One of them I know I better support, but no, seriously, I think and I agree with Gary, we need to take a look at those standards again. I don't see that they're low impact. Everything I've read on low impact does not include curbs and gutters unless they're just absolutely necessary. And I don't think that's been the case for Southern Shores. And I think we should go back and look at those and probably open it up to the public and let them have a say, because I hear a lot of rumblings going on over at Juniper, as Carlos has indicated. And one thing I would like to avoid is the situation we were in a couple of years ago at Dogwood intersection, Fairway Drive, Scuppernong, and other places where the community voiced their opinion and were displeased with the action the council took, and the council was insensitive. And matter of fact, I think a lot of that divided a lot of people in the town, which is not good. We all live here, we're neighbors, we need to work together and get along, and I think the council should be listening to the public. And if the public doesn't want something, then we shouldn't force it on them, and it has been forced on them. I think we did a really good job. This council did a really good job of listening to the Pelican Watch people. We were sensitive to their concerns, and we took action, and I think in the long run we did the right thing. But when it comes to streets and taking trees down and protecting our maritime forest, I think we've done a lousy job, and we should step back and start listening to what the public wants. Because the public, they're the ones that put us in this position. They trust us, and I don't think I've heard of one person said that a curb and gutter is really a nice thing to have. Most people detest them. Our road construction has taken down trees that have been there more than 100 years, and those trees have a definite benefit. There is no doubt about it. You talk about stormwater issues. The trees absorb a lot of water, but one of the most important things is the fact that the ambiance in Southern Shores is really a beautiful place to live, and that's why we all moved here. That's why I moved here. I mean, I could have gone anywhere on the Outer Banks or even another location, but I picked Southern Shores because of the ambiance and the vision that David Stick had when it was designed, and I feel like we should preserve that. And so one of the first places to start is look at our standards and really define what low impact is. I mean, I've looked at all the development of these swells, these curbs, these gutters, and that's some heavy construction. I don't see that that's being low impact whatsoever. And going down and cutting trees that have been there over 100 years, hardwoods, that's not low impact development. I don't want to see Southern Shores develop into a thoroughfare. We're already dealing with traffic issues. If we keep changing our roads and making it look like Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C., it's just going to ruin the ambiance of the community, and I think it's going to hurt us. So I guess bottom line is we need to start looking at listening to the public and being more sensitive to what the people want. And I think we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Mr. Mayor, I just want,
Yes, go ahead, yeah.
the town engineer is scheduled to come to your July 5th meeting, which is your infrastructure improvement matter on the agenda that night for the year. And I've been asked them to be prepared to engage in a dialogue with the council about the standards that night. And I will say from a staff perspective, 5 years ago when council started talking about it, one council member stood there and made the comment, we don't want to continue doing this or start this up again until we do it the right way. Those standards were adopted. So I would make the comment that until the council does like Mr. Newberry says and adopt a Southern Shores low impact development standard or standards, we're going to have this interpretation every single time on every single project. Until you say, thou shall never be a curb and gutter, period, and take it out of the engineer's decision-making process, it's always going to be an argument. Until you say, thou shall never take a tree down, it's always going to be in the engineer's decision-making process, and it's going to come back to you. On this particular project, we heard from one resident, and that's Mr. Gomez. I heard from one resident who was opposed to anything that was being designed there. There are no retention ponds in that project. He's mentioned that twice. The curb there is a mountable curb, what's called an Iowa curb, that we put on the curbs at streets intersections to protect the asphalt, to keep from having to come back each year from the truck chipping that asphalt. And I know there's an argument about that. So if this council wants to ban those, period, that's great. We will implement that policy immediately. But right now, that's not a standard. It is a low-impact development standard, and the engineer is doing that. I can assure you we're on those every time they make a design to make sure that what they're doing is included in low-impact development standards industry-wide, which do not ban or prohibit curbing. We've instituted the low mountable curb on every occasion, including Fairway Drive. So those are the type things we've done at the staff level with the town engineer. But if the council wants to make a policy decision to adopt specific prohibitive standards, that is fine with staff, because we will implement those immediately. And it'll take it out of our guesswork.
Thank you, Peter.
Peter, and I know you weren't here, but Carlos and I were and lived here. Those curbs were put in for safety when they put that sidewalk in because of the distance between the sidewalk and the street. And I have no problem with that, because it was brought up at that time. There was question about putting a curb in there, and it was explained to us that it was a safety issue. And that's fine. However, the design right there, and you know that, you've been out there, for that area right there is poor. I mean, it just pools water, not only there, but up the street a little bit where you turn into the Miller's driveway, pools in there, and I don't know, mistakes were made, and it should have been fixed originally in the right. And that's not about the design issue, that's about common sense. And I'll ask one question. Are both engineers coming, or is Joe coming?
We'll have the entire staff of
Good.
Deal Engineering coming.
Because he did most of the talking, and I know our engineer is not it's Deal, but Joe is working for him, so we need to make sure we have both of them here.
Yes, and that area that you spoke of is the main area that they studied to include in the low-impact development standard, to remove that water and keep it in the town right-of-way, which is the low point is across the street. So it couldn't stay where it was. It had to be channeled across the street into the right-of-way over on that side,
I
according to the
understand,
engineer.
but that area is low, and
Right.
that's why the water pools there, and that's the situation on the road.
Right.
So,
And I will say that the curb there, of course, as you say, is a safety
this is-
curb. The curb, I think, what the comment is about from Mr. Gomez is across the street at Sweet Gum. Again, that's the curb that we've put in to protect the town asset on the curbs that's gone in, the low-impact, mountable Iowa curbing. If council does not want that, adopt that as a standard, and that will not be included in any project.
Well,
That can be the Southern Shores LIDS standard.
and I'm not going to speak for Fred, but that's not what I'm saying. But from the article I read, and actually when we were down talking to some folks from Sunset Beach, what they're doing on those things is they're grading away from the road and creating rain gardens and things like that to catch water, and not putting those curves. They're widening those turns so they've got a corner for people to turn on. But the curbs are pushing the water back to the street, was what he was telling me, and
Some of that has to do with if you have enough area, right? I mean, if you
And well,
don't, isn't the challenge always when you don't have enough room? And that gets, Carlos, I'm sorry, you mentioned that getting easements to use people's properties in order to get that room. And so that may be a way to do it. At the same time, that's also relying on people to give you an easement. So I'm not saying that they won't, I mean, but one can't count on that. So maybe there's a middle ground to try to get, in the future, try to get these easements. But then again, a homeowner may own this property and say, I'm not gonna give you this easement, this is my property. I'm not gonna let you put a rain garden in my yard where you're gonna collect your water. And in that case, that's where the challenges are, when we have smaller amounts of areas where we're trying to collect this water. Historical problems, yes. But, you know, like you said, there's a curb protecting people crossing that bridge. That, my son and his friends use that bridge all the time. If that curb's not there, that's a death trap. So to Peter's point, I mean, I'm hesitant to say, oh, let's just get rid of all the curbs. Well, now we've gotten rid of all the safety curbs. Because it's a different use. Yes, it made the water problems worse, but is it saving lives? And so I'm torn. Let's talk to him and let's have him talk to us about a nuanced solution.
Let me ask a question. If we're going to have our town engineer, plus I think you said another engineer's coming?
The town engineer is Deal Engineering,
I
and he
can't
does
hear.
have two engineers associated on staff. So
Okay,
both of them
let
will
me
be
ask you this. Why couldn't we invite some other engineers and hear their opinions as well? Maybe we should have a public forum like we did for beach nourishment to educate the public. Maybe the public will better understand what you're trying to do. I mean, I'd like to hear some other opinions. I mean, I look at Chris, an architect. Yeah, he knows all about structures, but yet he does have a lot of latitude in his designs, so his designs may be different than another architect. Well, engineers are the same way. They interpret standards differently. And if an engineer has an environmental background, I guarantee you he's going to be different than one that's doing a lot of urban projects in big cities. And we're not a big city, and I think we're headed toward our standards being geared toward big city type construction, and I don't think that's what we want.
Of course, council can engage whatever engineer, but I would just submit, based on our experience in the town of Southern Shores, unless there is a standard that there shall never be a curb on this street, we're always going to have a debate about that street when it pops up. Each one of them are totally different. Every time we do a project, we get different comments, there's different geography, and there are different concerns. And it always centers on trees and curbs, it seems like, to disparage the project in the end and say, this ought not to be done this way. And it happens every single project, it seems like. And until that's taken away and we don't have that guesswork, there's always going to be a debate about it. And I'm sure two engineers are going to debate over whether a curb has to go somewhere or not when you bring it, but that's up to the council for sure.
And
Leo, you have anything else you want to add?
Well, you know, we debate this issue and we're point the fingers of mistakes maybe have been made. You know, we don't have control. That's history. We got to look at what the future is. And we can overreact and say, no curbs, and be done with it. But is that the right thing to do in every project? Everyone's going to be different. And I said this the last meeting. There has to be a balance somewhere in there. I'm by far no engineer, but I can tell you where on Spindrift we had to have a curb bucket put in there and it moved the water where it was supposed to go. And it, no problem, just that lower end. But we have to be very careful of what we wish for, because we may get some consequences we don't really want. Or if the road side starts deteriorating, then we're still going to have the residents are going to complain, why didn't you do it right the first time and change it? So, you know, we need to take a little time and study the thing and come up with whatever's going to be right. Because I think we all want to do what's right, but let's not overreact to it either. And that's my opinion. You know, we got our two engineers here. You know, we can get an engineer from some other town to come talk to, probably, that are experiencing the same things we are. We're not alone in this. There's other Nags Head's got Nags Head Wood, and Kitty Hawk's got Kitty Hawk over there, so, you know, what's their opinion? How are they addressing some of these issues? You know, maybe they've already gone through it and got a plan in place that maybe we could adjust, something would work here. But I just don't want to say nothing, because that will bite you.
Well, and the hard part that I see is that, a little bit to what Peter was saying, is that no matter what's done, if anything is done, somebody's going to be unhappy.
Well, yeah, you're
It's a
not.
fact.
Well, what was
I
it?
mean, look at the bulkhead project, where they tried to repair the bulkhead, and, you know, it was about the trees again, and you know, and it led to an argument over every single tree, and staff had to literally cut down and take a picture of a tree that was cutting through a bulkhead to prove that it was actually growing through the bulkhead, and they had to excavate and show this. Now, that's a little extreme that they had to do that and prove that. There may have been other trees that might not have had to have been removed.
Well, yeah, and
The point is more that.
Yeah,
no
don't
matter-
get me started, Chris.
No, but the point is that, no, you're absolutely willing to talk about it, but the point is that no matter, you're almost better off doing nothing. Fine, don't improve the streets. Let's not improve the streets. Let's not do anything. And the reason why, because, we're gonna get complaints. But the truth of it is, any movement, any improvement will cause complaints. And we as council have to hear that, and we have to discuss how to move forward.
yeah, and the big issue sitting there, guys, is we can say we do nothing and it becomes a safety issue, and then we got a liability potentially on our hands. And that's what I also worry about, some of these large trees in in our right of way. You let somebody hit one of those, or one of those come down on a car going by, we'll write a pretty good sized check. And that's a known thing. When we knowingly leave something in the way that can be a safety issue. Now, I love my trees, don't get me wrong, but I look at them as under two things. They're either an asset to me or they're a liability. In my case, if they're a liability, they're going to be near my house, they're gone. No, that's what I think.
I agree with you. And I got to say this, because people keep saying, when you fix something, when you do this, my whole point at the beginning, I said this, when we fix it, let's not break it. And that's what we've been doing. We're not fixing it. We're messing it up in several cases, and we are actually receiving the criticism of trying to repair damage that was done. And where and who, and I'm not blaming. If people think that we're blaming, that's wrong. We are just stating some facts here. If you look at different projects, they've not been done correctly, and that's my point. My point is we need to do it right. Another thing I would ask is that when we give, and I know Peter has meetings with the community and invites them in and they talk, but if we're going to cut trees like we did, we need to give notice to those folks so they know those trees are being cut in advance. We put cards on those things one day, and the next day we were cutting them down. It's just like, and I appreciate the chief's got signs up right now, the speed limit changed on 12, so you know. He's got signs up, and I said that 2 meetings ago. We need to communicate that and let people know. And same thing about things like taking trees out. We need to communicate that. I've already got a concern from folks on Dogwood that the trees on Juniper Trail were taken out, not by contract, but by the tree person, and it wasn't even in that. And are they going to come over and start cutting out trees on Dogwood Trail randomly to open up for a path? So you hear all kinds of things when you sit on this council, folks. And, you know, I told Peter, I emailed Peter, called down here and said, look, I got a concern about Juniper Trail, and we need to deal with it. And he did. And I went out and met with the engineer on site. Is it the way I would fix it? No. But it's the process is in there, and it's like Carlos said, we're probably too late to get anything changed. And the trees are gone. Hopefully that's all the trees that'll be gone. But we need to give notice to people and let them know what's happening within our community. Yeah, they're going to disagree. If you can't come down and cut trees in our yard, we're gonna question it.
I want to make a comment myself, but I'll ask Peter to.
Yeah,
give us
that's
his
certainly a
thoughts.
standard that the council can consider adopting as part of its standards. You know, City of Raleigh and City of Virginia Beach have standards that signs go up. Tree cutting will happen here. You know, we do write each individual within the project area and bring them into a meeting, give them an opportunity to come into a meeting that we hold, and also do one-on-ones if asked, and we show the trees on each plan that are going to be taken out. And if they choose not to participate, obviously they don't get notified. But if the council wants to direct signage that as a standard, that's something to consider.
Thank you, Peter. This is an ongoing dilemma. We, no reflection on Carlos, but we inherited a situation which we didn't ask for. We didn't raise our hands and say, let me come and fix that. Streets in Southern Shores were built to minimal standards as far as street construction measures are concerned. They satisfied, and they did the job, got us from where we wanted to go in town. But over time, the combination of the street construction, which was not always the best, very little attention was paid, the initial street design, to stormwater management at all, that it run off the streets onto whatever property it runs onto. And now, even then, you weren't supposed to do that. Now you can't put street water or town water onto private property. That's the reason why Fairway Drive became as expensive a project as it was, because we were dumping thousands of gallons of water on Duckwoods Country Club property for a quarter of a mile. I've gotten letters from them thanking us for the fact that we rectified that problem. So, you know, every shoe doesn't fit the same person. But the fact of the matter is that Scuppernong, another example, that residents there, everybody on Scuppernong W except one resident was happy to have their street be built. No problem. But one resident didn't want it because it took trees from what they thought was their front yard. It wasn't their yard, it was town right of way. So we're dealing with a situation that we didn't inherit. We did inherit, and we have to just make the best of it. There are our primary concern, obviously, is if we're going to build a street, let's build it properly, so we haven't got to rebuild it again in 3 years or repave it in 5 years. Otherwise, don't bother, just leave it like it is. If we're going to rebuild it, we have an obligation, as I said a minute ago, to correct the stormwater issues, and we're required by law to do that, so we can't just dump water on people's property. I'm amenable to discussing any of the standards we have now, looking at them carefully. If council wants to change them, we direct staff to do that, and that takes care of part of the problem, but it doesn't take care of the entire problem. We still have an overarching safety consideration we have to weigh very carefully on everything we do, having to do with streets or anything else. We have to be very careful that we're doing it in the public interest as far as safety. That's all I have to say about it. Anybody else have anything else? If not,
Yeah, I got something. I'm going back to my first suggestion. Why don't we bring some other engineers in here to talk to us? See if we could invite the one from Sunset Beach to see if he'd come talk to us, or she.
You want to make that in the form of a motion, Fred? You want to make a motion to do that, Fred?
Can we have our engineer speak to us first?
I'd
and
like
look
to
at
have
that?
them first, and then if we get some disagreement or want more information, then go.
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm going to disagree,
Well,
because of
what's
what's
new?
going on is just totally, I think it just ignores what the public wants and common sense. And I don't care if it is so-called best engineering practices. We got to find alternatives. Putting these curbs in is, first of all, I think it's a waste of money. It's a lot of maintenance on it, and it's destroying the ambiance of the community, and we can do low-impact development without curbs. And I would like to hear from some environmental engineering firms. We can listen to our engineer first, and then make a decision in form of a formal motion to go with a public forum and invite in some other engineering companies and some landscape environmentalists. Because I think it's starting to heat up again. It's going to get serious. As Gary said, and I'm sure you've heard too, there are rumblings going on with what we're doing to our streets and destroying our ambiance of the town. And I'm one of them. I don't like it. I tell you what, that project at the corner of 12 and East Dogwood is an absolute disaster. That's the biggest sore eye. I tell you what, I'm embarrassed that tourists come up and down that street seeing that big old pond over there. And what kind of impact is that going to have in the future? The mosquito problem is going to be atrocious. And we've done, and I don't know if we're going to do anything to landscape it. We're just going to have a big old pond sitting out there full of water. Yeah, you may have accomplished one problem we have, but I think we're creating another.
Fred, you're creating a situation where you're throwing a lot of speculation out there, and you don't know any of the facts of what's going to actually end up being there. You haven't seen the finished product. You have not seen the finished product. You haven't
Well, I
seen
may
the-
not have seen
We don't
it.
even know if it's going to work or not.
Yeah,
Let's
but
just
the thing
keep
about
our
it,
fingers
Tom, I'm
crossed.
not stupid. I can see a big old pond there, and I can see it full of water. It's just bad. And I own property down there, and I go by it every day, and I say, God, why did we do this?
It's an infiltration basin, Fred, it's not a pond.
You call it whatever you want
Well,
to.
I'm
If it
telling you what
fills
the
up
engineers
water, it's
call it.
a pond, and we'll call it a lake if you want to. But I tell you, I'm really upset with it. And I've heard a lot of other people say the same thing. We created an eyesore there. We have.
Well, the
Well,
project's
to answer
not
your
done
question
yet, is
As
it?
to why we did it, we had a problem there.
Well,
And we had
Which problem?
several members of the community,
Well, you
public
had the
safety
people
wise,
right
had,
around there that had to, that
but
lived
they
by
had
it.
ice there, remember that? Remember the
Yeah, I
emails we're
remember
getting
that.
about the ice,
Yep.
remember? We
Yep.
got the emails about people skidding out, and this was a danger, and we had to address it right away.
Well, my
So-
point is, I think we're taking the advice maybe of one engineer. We ought to start talking to others and get other opinions.
We
because-
got, wait, Fred, that's what I mean by statements, we take we didn't take the advice of one engineer, we consulted with NCDOT who owns the property, where the problem was being created, and they worked with us very closely on that. And
Well,
our
maybe
engineers
they
and
did,
the
but
NC.
I think there were other alternatives that weren't explored.
Well,
I'll rest my
the
case.
alternatives were looked at pretty carefully by NCDOT, they were the ones that had to approve
They
the work.
had to approve the damn.
So I'm not going to discuss that any further. I think we wait and see how it turns out.
Well,
Let's
my
be a little
point,
patient.
Tom, is we can't worry about water over the dam, but we can worry about the future. And I think that's the point Gary's made, it's the point I'm trying to make, Carlos, Debbie made, and some of these other people would probably say the same thing.
And I
We
appreciate
need to
that.
be concerned about the future.
And I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for your comments, and in fact, you're getting feedback from people who support what you're saying. I get exactly the opposite from people that talk to me, so I've got to weigh what I'm hearing from people on your
Both
side of the
sides.
issue and what I hear on my side of the issue. Simple as that.
Yeah,
I've also
and
got to weigh one other thing that I think we're kind of overlooking here. Except for Highway 12, the town is responsible for its streets and the public safety on those streets and the stormwater on those streets. And we have to weigh everything we do very carefully, that we're protecting our residents from, essentially from themselves and from things we didn't take care of. And that's an overriding consideration to me, is what is our responsibility as a town? And that's why sometimes I come down the side of going ahead and doing more than doing less. And that's simple as that.
Okay, let's move
Got
on.
a motion to adjourn, council?
So moved.
Whoa, you got
What do
more
we
on the
got?
agenda there, sir.
What?
Other business?
You got mayor comments and.
I said I have no further comments.
Well, then you got council members.
Council members, make their, I thought you were
don't
doing
have
that.
We were doing that.
We were doing that.
Actually, no, we were discussing,
Okay.
All right, you want to we start
Come on,
with,
gentlemen,
start with Fred. Do you
follow.
have any council comments, which I asked for before?
I think I've said enough.
I hope so. Thank you.
And I don't have any.
Thank you.
No comments.
I do.
Okay.
What's new?
Surprise.
I could actually, see, we need to understand, we're going to disagree with we need to accept that we can agree to disagree at times, but we need to move forward as a whole.
Right.
We need to do that. One other thing I want to point out, general public comment. We need to remember, this is for our community members to express themselves. And we can agree, we're going to agree or disagree with them, ongoing. I mean, but we need to be respectful of the individual, their ideas, their concerns, and we need to listen to them. And we need to keep that in mind. I've been challenged out there many times, as all of us have, and we need to be respectful back and be careful what we do. So I just wanted to say that, because that is a time for the public to express themselves. We're not going to always agree with them. But that's that freedom of speech or whatever time, and they need to bring those things to us, and we want that to be a friendly area. So I understand it's not been. On that East Dogwood and Highway 12 thing, you know, we're going to have to look at that. You're right, we're going to have to look at that because it is a catch basin. And if it fills up, there's a lot of children that live right back in that community. And we've created a liability for ourselves. So we may have to fence it in.
May have to
So-
fence it, may have to landscape it, we discussed all that.
I know. So, and that's not even been discussed.
We're a
So,
little ways from that, yeah. We got a few more weeks.
actually, we're not because it's deep. And if a kid crawls in there this summer,
Yeah.
we, as Leo said earlier, we're going to get hit hard. So with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Gary. Anything else, council?
We got a motion to move on. To adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.